Hit that at all.
Episode 5.
Episode 5. Welcome to Sunday Plus.
Welcome, everybody.
This is, man, it's starting to get into a rhythm, I feel like.
It is getting into a rhythm. It's fun. I think we've gotten some subscribers even on our YouTube channel from outside of the church, which is pretty cool.
That is wild. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Well, I mean,
not me.
You did. Obviously, you did. You knew this was going to be a smash.
I just felt it in my bones.
Of course. Well,
so we had this was the last series of the candy series.
Yeah, we are done officially. Kids, if you're watching this, I apologize. You'll have to steal candy like every other week instead of just been giving it in worship every time.
It's been fun because you consistently make candy references through each during preaching through each week, and after the second week, I just kind of started waiting for it. I'm like, where is it? It's gonna come. He's gonna start talking about candy. Naturally, there it was. There were just candy references everywhere, and children's time was nuts because
that was I was trying to figure out okay, because I really wanted to give them a piece of candy that they had to hold in their hand the entire time, and I thought if I try and do that, not only do we have to go through the hordes of kids piling on top of each other to get the candy, but they're also gonna peek through to see what they want as opposed to just here's a Snickers, here's a Starburst.
They're definitely gonna be trying to eat it and open it during children's time.
Right? Yeah, which goes against the entire exercise, which was I've given you candy for 4 weeks now. Now it's time to give it to somebody else. Yeah. Which I did have a very sweet little girl who I guess she's heard me talk about Reese's peanut butter cups the entire time. So at the end of worship, she comes up and she has written my name on the Reese's on the wrapper for the Reese's and hands it to me, and I thought it was sweet.
Nailed it.
That's right.
Oh, by the way, is today officially happy birthday?
Today is happy birthday, 23rd birthday of Creekwood. Yes, no, not us. We are aging backwards, actually. So,
yes.
23rd birthday for Creekwood
is today.
Yeah, first wild. Sunday was February 3rd of 2002, back in Lovejoy Elementary School gym.
So, I'm kind of curious about some of this. Pull back the curtain for a second, because I feel like you know enough about the system to kind of give some context around this. Do Methodist churches pop up because there's enough people that have a common goal in an area where the Methodist church isn't necessarily currently represented? And then they're just like, hey, let's start something. They go to the conference and say, we want to start a Methodist church, and then just, all right, file this paperwork or something. How does it work?
Yeah, that would be wildly more effective. But it's the same in most denominations. So historically, and I'm talking early 1900s when all these churches are starting, it was people were on more of a frontier, or they would get together for a Bible study, and then they would get to such a size of which, or a spiritual maturity level where they say, we want a pastor to come lead us. So somebody ordained would come and lead them. Nowadays, we do things like everybody else. We have a calling from church leadership to say, hey, we'd like to plant more churches in these areas that are underrepresented, and which church is feeling that call. So, for example, in 2020, 2021, Custer Road was feeling that call. So then they had a young clergy couple come up in their ranks.
2001, you mean?
Did I say 21? Yeah, 2000.
You did that yesterday, too.
I did that, too, yeah. 2000 and 2001, they had a young clergy couple, and they picked this area that did not have, I guess, a United Methodist Church within 5 miles. There's Good Shepherd, and there's First Allen and First McKinney, so I guess it's just around 5 miles. And they sent, at first it was people who were driving this way, and a lot of the people who were driving this way that were already going to Custer Road moved into the area to help plant the church.
Where were they meeting?
They were meeting at Pete and Barry Harris's house. They were doing in Oakwood at their
someone's
old
house.
All right.
Yeah,
they were at someone's house, and they were doing Bible studies and game planning on what it would mean. And then they would invite other people from existing neighborhoods and 25 years ago, this area was not nearly as built up as it is now.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, you could say that about most of the areas north of Dallas,
like 635.
635, pretty much, yeah, pretty much north of 635. Because I grew up, over in the colony, and then so 121. I remember before it was a highway, and it was just like a 2-lane road.
2-lane road, yeah.
Like, I actually have memory of that because I'm old. But yeah, just seeing, and then now Prosper is
Salina's
blowing
up.
and the colony is like an actual destination place because it's got Grandscape,
right,
and the truck yard, and Nebraska Furniture, and all these crazy businesses. So yeah, the urban sprawl is no joke.
It's no joke, and I think there was good foresight on, hey, this area is going to be more populous, and let's put another church there. And so yeah, it was just, we think there should be a church there. We're going to go send people. It's very New Testament evangelistic. Go out and carve a niche for yourself.
How long did they meet at the house before they switched or said, hey, let's actually build a building?
It was about so they met at the house for Bible study starting in 2001. Then actually the founding 8 families, like the original 8 families, bought what I think was 15 acres of land just by themselves. Like they signed for it, and they were like, because there was the land that we're on was owned by Donna and Sharon Brazil. And after 9/11 happened in 2001, they had already decided they were going to sell it, but they wanted to do something more meaningful with it. And there was kind of this connection of this church that was starting and the Brazils, and they sold them for like a really cheap amount of money for this amount of acreage. So they moved and they started having offices in what's now the Student Center, and they got a contract with Lovejoy Elementary School to meet and worship. So that was when they started meeting and worship. It was the kind of thing where you have to set up chairs every week, and you have to set up a stage. You have to make it look like a worship environment. Then you got to tear it all down. It's exhausting. So they did that from 2002 to 2008. And that was when I don't remember what month it was. Somebody else could tell you, but 2008 is when the worship center opened.
I have worked at some churches where that was the case.
Yeah.
I was working with up at First Prosper, and they were starting like a Saturday night thing, and it was at an elementary school.
Yeah, Cockrell Elementary up there.
Yeah.
It's called The Mission.
Yeah. I was the worship leader for that.
Were you really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
For quite a while, and then they decided they were going to move it to Sunday morning, and I was like, well, I have a job.
Sorry about that.
Doing that, I can't really continue to do it. But yeah, it was tear everything down after worship is over and pack it all up, and the amount of work that goes into that, because the sound system, the screen, if they don't have one, getting everything, it's an entirely remote thing.
I mean, I've heard people say that they would show up and worship was something at like 10:30 or whatever, and they'd show up at 7:30 just to start, because the praise team has to have time to practice. We did this when I was an associate at Stonebridge. You're talking about a multi-million-dollar facility where one side of the building is set up for worship all the time.
Yeah.
But where the bridge was, where I led worship, was a gym during the week.
I remember that.
So we basically operated like a church start every single week for 6 years. I mean, I was there for 6 years. It's still going on. But
when the first time I came and saw you preach at the bridge, I remember, really enjoying worship and everything. And I mean, the second my wife and I stood up, people started, chairs.
It's a very welcoming thing. It was like, hold on, get out of the way. We got to stack these chairs. There's basketball practice in an hour.
Yeah. I just, there was a church a few years ago. This would have been 2017 that I had some friends down in Austin, and they were looking for a new worship leader. And so they said, hey, call this guy. Because I wasn't working at a church at the time. I was just a gigging musician. So I went down there, and it was the Sunday after Easter, and they were meeting in a CrossFit gym.
Wow, okay.
So there's kind of that smell of sweat and cleaning material, cleaning chemicals. And
the body of Christ tastes differently with that.
Woo,
yeah.
Their setup was nuts. Like, their sound system was probably better than ours.
Wow.
And it was
and they're
all
rolling
mobile.
it in every time.
Yeah, they wheeled it in, and like the gear was no joke. And they wanted to keep it. So I did the thing. Everybody loved me, but I was like, that was a deal breaker for me. I was like, I do not want to come in at 5:30 on a Sunday morning, every Sunday morning, and start wheeling in this stuff. No matter how good the gear is, no matter how good the band is, no matter how like. So I appreciate that dedicated nature to people
Oh,
who
yeah.
just every single week they're like, we're gonna get up, get all this stuff, and set everything up, and make it feel like it was meant to be this way,
Right.
and then tear it all down.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some relationships that forge in the fire that way.
Woo.
But I thank you to everybody who got this off the ground, because I
Yes,
I have
thank
been
you.
a part of it, and it is exhausting. And everybody who was a part of it that I know has said how great it was, how meaningful it was. They never want to do it again. I mean, it's
Having a dedicated space to do worship is the best thing.
Yeah.
Because as I always put it, it just removes distractions and allows you to focus on the only thing that actually matters, which is worshiping and growing in your faith and spiritual understanding. And when you're having to work around the parameters of, oh no, this is not our space, it complicates that.
Well, it was interesting because, like, Barbara Brown Taylor writes a book called The Altar in the World, and it's about finding the divine in the ordinary, which is something I totally believe in. But I also went to a new church start that I thought I was going to get appointed to a long time ago just to check it out. And it was in an elementary school, which is where most new churches start in schools.
Yeah.
And I remember, they had the stage. It was in the cafetorium. And on the wall are all these bulletin boards that are very specific to what's going on at the school. And it's just really like, maybe I shouldn't have been distracted, but I was sitting there, I was worshiping and I'm paying attention, but all of a sudden I'm curious. I was like, oh, it is Black History Month next month. Okay. They're going to be doing MLK, and okay, they're going to be studying Rosa Parks. Okay. And all of a sudden I'm completely lost track of the worshiping environment. So I agree. Having that sacred space is something that I know is, there was a movement where like churches spend too much on buildings, and that was a thing. But I think it's important to have
The late 90s, early 2000s, you had all these churches just building these monstrosities.
Yeah.
And Dallas has no short of them.
Oh, we've got a
shortage
lot.
of them.
Well, and I was even talking about, there's a movement of people who are like, the pendulum swings, and so we've built the Crystal Cathedral and the greatest things that ever existed in terms of church architecture.
Yeah.
And then it swung to this: if you spend too much money on a building, then you are anti-Christ. I was like, well, hold on. There's a happy medium here, because there is something really valuable about having sacred space to walk into and know that. It's a little bit like going to the ballpark, right? You can watch a game at home, and it's probably a better view than you're going to get at the ballpark, but it doesn't feel the same.
The experience is unparalleled.
Yeah. So if you go to the ballpark, you are entering into a space where it's going to be a little crazy. It's going to be this way and you're allowed, and people act differently at sporting events. So if you can release some of the world for a little while to walk into a sacred space and just act not inauthentic, but like you were talking about worshiping passionately, right? If I'm singing "Oh for a Thousand Tongues to Sing" or "Oh Come to the Altar," I can act differently because I'm just giving myself to God for an hour at least, like pouring myself out. And I think that's important for people to have a door that they can walk through from the insanity of the world to the safeness of the sanctuary.
And then on that note, you brought up on Sunday the fun COVID.
Oh
years.
Man, yeah.
And so then you go from, all right, we've got this beautiful sacred space that we have, and now nobody can come.
Yeah.
And so trying to pivot very, very rapidly, as we all did,
very rapidly, yeah,
and figure out how to do that. How do you do, because were you guys doing proper online worship before COVID?
No, we owned what's called a Mevo camera, which you've probably heard of and would never use.
Weren't those originally designed to help people with their golf swing?
I don't know. It follows. So it seems like it's good for maybe a Zoom call of some sort. Like it does follow the speaker around.
Because I remember I looked into those, and all I found were a ton of videos of guys showing you how to utilize it so it can
golf
analyze
swings?
your golf swing.
Well, shoot, do we still have it? I might need to take this. I need all the help I can get. Yeah, we had that, and I'm just not a germaphobe. So when all this was coming down, like we heard about the things in China and we heard about it kind of in Europe and a little bit on the East Coast. And I remember saying, well, great, let's just wipe the counter down a little bit more and let's whatever. And I actually went down to Galveston on spring break with my kids, and we're at Moody Gardens, and I just keep getting calls from people at the church. Was like, "Hey, this thing's coming. What are we gonna do about this?" I was like, "Yes, we're fine. We're fine." Like I didn't take it seriously at all. And finally, like on Wednesday of that week, it was finally like the news hit, and I think Abbott was talking about shutting things down, and Trump was talking about shutting things down. I was like, all right, I guess we need to take this a little more seriously. So I got on the phone to our communications director at the time, and I was like, okay, look, you have to figure out how to use this Mevo camera, and you got to figure out how to stream worship, and you have 3 days to do it. So yeah, we had streamed one Ash Wednesday service, and it was terrible quality. So we literally stuck this camera on a makeshift tripod, and we put it about 4 rows into the sanctuary, and I just talked the entire time. And I think by week 2 or 3, we figured out how to patch the soundboard into it. And then by week 4, we finally got the praise band to come lead songs, because before that, we had video recording of some praise band songs, and we would splice in. We would like just go live to the recording of the praise band to do some worship. It was wild. Serving on the board of ordained ministry, it was nuts to see how many people, when talking about like how to do communion, as we talked about, or otherwise, like the rules go out the window.
Thing.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do about communion? Because you can't do it, and yet it's because we debated about this stuff. I was at Treach at the time, and we were debating about this, and we didn't do communion for maybe I think the first month we skipped it, and then we ultimately were like, no, it's more meaningful and important, and the spirit of it can carry over. We found value in that, and it was we were having these same conversations, and I think there was to an extent, some people were reaching out to other churches and saying, well, what are you guys doing? How are you doing?
Right.
This?
Yeah. There was a lot of connection and community. Community learning was really great. That's what I'll tell you. I have never been accused of being a rebel at all in my life. But the first week I said, okay, we're going to do communion, and we're just going to tell everybody, get a solid and a liquid from their house and do communion. And this was probably about 12 weeks before we gained permission to do communion. But we did communion every single week, as we don't want just people sitting in their lazy boys watching us.
Yeah.
We want them to worship and do stuff. And and one of the coolest stories came out of this. It was a little kid named Carter Garman, who we just, I made jokes about any solid, any liquid, just get an Oreo, get some milk or whatever. So sure enough, they did communion with Oreos and milk.
Perfect.
And it was amazing. And I think on like Wednesday or Thursday of the next week, Carter's at breakfast with his mom or lunch with his mom or something, and she goes, "Can I have more of Jesus's body and blood?" And was obviously asking for Oreos and milk. But it was like that, the altar in the world. Like, it was cool that he had associated food in general with the communion sustenance.
That's such an interesting way to approach that. And then that kid is going to hold that in his head, and someday he's going to tell his adult friends the story. Yeah, I used to think that Oreos and milk was Jesus's body and blood. Man.
Absolutely. Very sweet. Yeah, it's the cream fill in the middle.
I was a big fan. I remember hearing somebody told me that story with the Oreos and milk thing, and I remember being such a big fan of that. I didn't realize that that's where it came from. That it was like a kid that was like, oh, here we go. Here's my solid. Here's my.
Yeah, we were just. It was because people also were like a little nervous to go to the grocery store. And so we didn't want to freak people out by saying, okay, you've got to have King's Hawaiian bread and you've got to have Welch's grape juice, or else it doesn't count. Because, Jesus said, we've already made concessions, because Jesus took wine and unleavened bread, and we're using King's Hawaiian, which actually tastes good, and grape juice so that alcoholics can be a
Did
part
you
of
know
things.
that Welch's was actually made for the Methodist
It
Church?
was, yeah.
I learned that the actual brand Welch's was a Methodist brand.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was he was a dentist.
Yeah.
He was a dentist that developed grape juice so that during Prohibition, Methodists could still take communion.
That is the things that come out of necessity and innovation being forced. I think that's just completely wild. And now Welch's is just synonymous with that's just the grape juice brand, but it's a Methodist. And I actually don't know how we landed on King's Hawaiian.
I don't know how it's weird because so many people do it. I think it's just,
that's what I grew up on.
Did you really? Okay.
Oh yeah, so like the Methodist church I grew up at, it was always King's Hawaiian bread and Welch's grape juice.
We did not do that, but we did have like big fluffy, wonderful tasting bread. And in seminary, I remember there was a whole team of people that would bake the bread like the day before.
So
chapel.
Jealous.
It was amazing. So
I see. Yeah, you get me a really nice sourdough loaf.
Yeah.
Let's go.
I don't know if I've told you this before, but at a previous church, before I got there, they were on this big kick around we need to be more biblical. We need to do things in the biblical way. This is along the same lines in which people were like really upset about Santa Claus and various other things that we can just get over as Christians. But they wanted to be more biblical, and so they're like, well, why aren't we taking communion with unleavened bread? So they didn't go like by matzah, but they baked unleavened bread.
I mean, there are bread recipes in the Bible.
Yeah, I
the Ezekiel bread is a common one. You have to get that in the freezer section.
As I say, you can go to Sprouts and get it. It's
because it doesn't last very long.
It doesn't last very long, and I don't think it's very tasty either. But that's my opinion.
It's fine. It does really like the Ezekiel bread you get in the frozen section. It comes like a standard loaf and it's pre-sliced because it's frozen. But my wife and I, we probably still have some in our freezer.
Okay.
But it does really well for like standard like toast.
Okay.
When
I
you
stand corrected.
When you saute it in a cast iron pan in butter.
Wow, nice. That's our next podcast is Biblical Cooking Lessons with John Hames.
I've experimented in quite a bit of it. I haven't made any bread. I'm not much of a baker. I'm more of you give me, a couple of cast irons and, just a good cutting board, sharp knife and some tongs or whatever, and I'll make some magic happen.
Nice. Yeah. So they made this unleavened bread and had it for communion for 1 week. And the next week, everyone would kind of abandoned we need to do everything biblically standard because it tasted so unlike King's Hawaiian that they were like, well, we can make this one concession, and which we all make concessions biblically. It's just part of.
Well, it's the other one is the a lot of the non-denominational churches or Bible churches, they have those little pre-packet things, and that little wafer, which literally tastes like styrofoam.
I think it is made of styrofoam. I'm pretty sure.
I remember the first time I had one of those, I was like, "What is this?" Because I grew up on King's Hawaiian, and I didn't start exploring and visiting other churches till I was in high school, and it was like, is this even food? Right. What is this all about? I definitely prefer the King's Hawaiian setup, and we didn't start doing intinction until I was already in middle school.
Yeah,
that was we were very much You
had a shot glass.
Yeah, we had the shot glass, and then the holy shot glass. But yeah, it was just the different variations on it, and I find that so interesting. It's all the same thing, but.
It was all the same. I think it's this interesting concept of Peter Enns writes a book called How the Bible Really Works. And it's going to be pretty far out there and academic for some people, but it talks about how this is a terrible paraphrase of it, but essentially we take the values inherent in what God is offering and make them relevant for our context, essentially, which sounds terrible if you're a real biblical literalist, but essentially along the lines of if Jesus is using Passover bread that's unleavened because there's a story in that, to bless the elements in that Last Supper, we have King's Hawaiian because it is the greatest symbol of abundance. And if Sunday is supposed to be in a little Easter in which we celebrate the kingdom of God's presence here on earth, then why not have something that's abundant versus, that's where the interesting thing about the non-denoms, like, I think it's just convenient to pass those out.
Oh, it's definitely convenient.
Opposed to, but it's like so Catholic. And most non-denoms are trying to be as but like as far away from Catholic as possible.
This is this very dogmatic, very traditional. Everything is this way, and can't really. There's not a lot of wiggle room, and we're trying to go and find as much wiggle room as possible and do things unique to us. And I get it.
Yeah, I mean, if the Passover bread was deliverance, then the communion bread is abundance, and they're both Jesus.
Yeah.
So.
That's interesting. So I wrote down a couple of interesting things, and I'm trying to remember. What I'll just read this phrase to you, and then you tell me what the context was, because I'm trying to remember what it was.
Okay.
Jesus isn't your golden ticket.
It was more specific to individual golden ticket versus a corporate golden ticket. In that,
explain that.
So there's often in Christian circles this understanding that the only reason that Jesus matters is for my personal salvation, and my entire Christian journey is around my salvation and my ticket to heaven. And there's an expression, when Jesus was on the cross, he was thinking of you. And I think all of that is true, but not the complete picture of, if we're looking at salvation as shalom that Jesus talked about in terms of peace, that is a oneness with each other, oneness with creation. And so salvation is more than just a golden ticket away from our problems. Salvation is a complete transformation to oneness with Christ, oneness with God through Christ.
Yeah.
And if I'm one with God, then I have to be one with my neighbor, because I've got to love God and love my neighbor. So when we just think about, I'm punching my ticket and this is my golden ticket and it's just for me, we forget about the social holiness part of salvation. Of Jesus said, what are the two greatest, what's the greatest commandment? And he didn't list one, he listed two, love your neighbor, love your God, love your neighbor. And of course I always add love yourself as well in there. So yeah. So I just think it's in the context of, if we're using, it was a Willy Wonka reference.
Yes.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And
no, Willy Wonka.
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Sorry,
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is uncomfortable to watch.
That's the and Charlie. That's the name of the book.
That is the name of the book, and I believe,
and the Johnny Depp version,
the Johnny Depp, Tim Burton version, was more true to the way that the book was written. But the OG Willy Wonka, Gene Wilder, like that one is just a far superior
It's
movie.
amazing. Yeah.
Did you know that the kid that played Charlie Bucket's from Dallas?
I did not know that, but it makes it even better.
Yeah, and this is like the only thing he did.
I do remember hearing that. Yeah.
He's like a teacher now, like up in upstate New York or something.
Interesting. Yeah, I do remember.
And he just did this one movie that's one of the more iconic movies.
Right.
And he was like, all right, I'm good. I got it. Yeah. Fantastic. But, I liked that reference of, the golden ticket. And I had actually never made that correlation of the 7 deadly sins being personified through the individual characters of Mike TV being sloth and
apathy, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense. Augustus Gloop being, he's all about gluttony
and consumption.
And so it's definitely it seems glaringly obvious now, but I was definitely captivated by that notion, because as you were describing it, I started jumping ahead in my mind. I'm like, wait a minute, and I started thinking about all the characters. I'm like, oh yeah, she's greedy. Oh yeah, she's.
I have no idea if that's what Roald Dahl is going for, but I think it's the genius of like literary consistency of when Dante is writing these characteristics into Inferno or the Divine Comedy. You've got Roald Dahl. They're both making social commentary.
Yeah.
So it's not Roald Dahl saying, "Oh, I'm going to use the 7 deadly sins," but it is interesting that religious or not, the thing that is a social commentary from the prophets in the Bible all the way to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is, well, If you're too greedy, it's going to end wrong. If you're too slothful, it's going to end wrong. If you're too gluttonous, it's going to end badly. If you're too prideful, it's going to end badly. Maybe we should just like be a community that shares with each other. Who knows? Maybe it seems to work that way. It seems to work better when we do that.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting way to take these ideas of bad behavior, good behavior, and then diving in to a little deeper. But on the surface, it's just a story about some dumb kids
who want a lifetime supply of chocolate and a never-ending gobstopper.
Well, none of them ended up getting any of it. But
that's very true. Yeah, the idea of a never-ending gobstopper is not appealing to me whatsoever. Like
at all.
No,
it sounds so cool when you're like 12,
right.
But yeah, as an adult, I'm like, no, that'd be gross.
The scene that I constantly reference for some reason is the lickable wallpaper.
The snozberries taste like snozberries.
So whenever like my kids are getting out, they're like, I'll have raspberries, I'll have strawberries, and I'll say the snozberries taste like snozberries, and they just look at me like, what are you talking about?
It's the movie is incredible. It really is. There are like the weird moments in that movie that always jump out, like the boat scene where you're terrified for about 30 seconds. You're like, this is getting so uncomfortable, and then it's fine.
Right.
Did you ever hear Gene Wilder talking about how he said if they didn't let him do that opening scene where he would like lose the cane and then do the front somersault thing, he said, if you don't let me do this, I'm out.
Yeah, I did. I read about that sometime. Yeah.
But the foresight that he said, if that's my introduction, then you as the viewer will never know if I'm lying or telling the truth about something.
Oh, that's brilliant. I didn't even think about that part.
Because he said, at first I'm coming out as this, kind of mildly crippled because I can't walk perfectly. And then just kidding, I'm going to do a front, somersault.
Which I'll say makes the, like, if we're really going from a true biblical parallel of Willy Wonka, Jesus answers no question directly, but in parables.
Oh, yeah.
And the entire time, Willy Wonka just doesn't answer any of the kids' questions whatsoever. Like, it's all can you follow me through this chocolate factory and end up being as pure and true as possible? And I'm going to only mildly guide you, I guess.
And he set them up, too, because the guy that was the competitor who stopped all the kids.
Slugworth.
Yeah. Arthur Slugworth, or whatever it is, and then she's like, nope, that guy works for me.
Right.
Like, that was a lie too.
Right. Not we're saying Jesus is a liar. We're not saying that, but
just the deception in order to get truth out of you and give you opportunities to actually make a righteous decision.
Yeah, I think it's the free will and the get you to think for yourself, like get you to own it, because it's the human development. When you're a kid and your parents tell you to do something, it's their choice. And eventually you get into teenage years and all of a sudden their choice doesn't make a lot of sense to you. And so you have to process through and own it. And Jesus seems to be this master of human development, obviously, because
it's pretty good.
He's really good. He can take these people who are, unwanted, lead them through a process of discernment to where they actively choose to go give their lives for this mission.
When you can get somebody to actively make the earnest right decision on their own volition, like they decided to do that, but it was because of all the kind of interwoven stuff that you were doing on the side for so long, it's
a good leader.
That's a good leader.
Yeah. When you have the advantage of having all of the divine wisdom of God, I feel like that's a cheat code.
Yes. So I want to close with this last little thing. You were talking a lot about the story of Creekwood. You mentioned, the birthday of Creekwood. You mentioned, surviving through the COVID and the church being able to come together and the church growing back up to a great strength again post-COVID. And you mentioned the word vision, I think at least once, but maybe twice. And so I wanted to see what do you see as the vision of specifically Creekwood, but you could say the church in general.
Yeah. So, written down, it sounds something like a welcoming community of people growing in spiritual maturity with a focus on the next generation, so that wherever we are and whoever we're with, we can share the love of God with them. And Linda Judd was our church council chair that's became leadership board chair, and she's very corporately minded. And I remember she said the words, "We want to flood the marketplace with Christianity." And
that's an aggressive.
It was aggressive
stance,
but it was the idea that, because we have people that it's a bedroom community on some level. They work in different places. We're not around each other all week. We have different school districts. It's not like we're not just one group of people that's homogenous that can go do one thing. And so the idea is, but we are bringing in this diversity of people who can grow in spiritual maturity and biblical education to wherever they find themselves throughout the week, utilize that. So our vision has been, we don't want to just be a church that you have to be here to do ministry. We want to be a church that's a training ground and a development lab for...
A training ground and development
development lab. So
that's... Woo!
Yeah.
Have you used that way to describe it before?
I've used training ground a lot, but development lab I like a lot better. I think, the idea...
It's like an R&D department.
I think, and that's where the whole exploration part of it comes in. Like, I love that Creekwood is and could be even more so this, what does it look like to get in my small group? And I am an HR professional, and my boss has told me I have to fire half the company.
Oh.
And how do I do that and love my neighbor at the same time? Yeah. Or if I am a CEO and my company just had record profits.
Yeah.
And I have...
What do you do with that?
What do I do with that? If I am a school teacher and I'm dealing with a difficult student, or if I'm a student who sits next to a difficult student, what do I do with that? And being able to get in a lab, and especially in our student ministry where, we have 7th grade boys. And if you've never been around 7th grade boys, they're just difficult by nature.
I remember being
we were both 7th grade boys. We remember doing that. Yeah.
I was probably not awesome.
So I just think it's a great opportunity, and the vision we have is we're not going to be the church that goes and marches down the street for something, but we're going to be the church that has little pockets of influence all over. And even in some of the people's industries that they're a part of, they literally impact the nation and the world. So can we infuse the values of Jesus into those little pockets because they're so faithful in their attendance and giving and everything here, that they develop to be, and so then the world starts to shift a little bit more toward the kingdom of God than it was before.
I can get behind that vision.
Yeah, I think it's something. We've been discerning it consistently, and I think we finally hit on it. I love the development lab language of it. Like
that's a really cool parallel, and it very much paints a picture, and it gives us the chance to look at this as a constantly going thing where there isn't really a finish line that we're aiming for. It's just constantly trying to figure out and understand something more.
Yeah.
I also like the way you just threw the word infuse in there. That's just immediately made me think of, a cup of tea with some, just a very few tea leaves can steep in and change the entire thing through that infusing process.
The kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. Small thing. The kingdom of God is like the field that dictates everything in your life. That's where Jesus talks about the kingdom of God.
Members of the church can be like the tea leaves that changes the entire cup of water.
Right? I think I actually used that tea. I did not know how tea packets worked from a scientific standpoint until I did a sermon about it.
I love me a good cup of tea, but it's I don't do tea packets. I do loose leaf tea because it's better. Always better.
Yeah.
But to get to see that, that is a really good parallel to do that. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that,
episode 5.
Episode 5. Thanks for hanging out with us. Peace.
See ya.